Hello students, welcome to the series on international marketing. Today we are going to study the general concept and definition of international marketing. In this we are basically going to cover the process of international marketing, the issues and challenges of international marketing and the basic impacts of international marketing on the society. Now let's study the basic definition of international marketing. According to Sincota, international marketing is the process of planning and conducting transactions across national borders to create exchanges that satisfy the objectives of individuals and organizations. According to Green, international marketing focuses its resources on global market opportunities and threats. According to Usner, international marketing is the motor of the internationalization of the process of the firm. It is a tool to obtain improvement in the firm's position in the global market. So basically international marketing is beyond the national borders. It is more important to focus on the issues related to other countries because the markets are expanding in this era of liberalization and globalization. Now, how do we go about with the internationalization of the products? Let's see in this diagram. Now, you have to decide whether you have to go abroad or you have to work in the national borders. Deciding which markets to enter is important. After that, you have to decide how to enter the international market in terms of the programs you built up for the exchange of goods and services in the international markets. For this, basically the company has to decide on the internal resources and the kinds of the strength the company has. Now let's study the difference between the international marketing and the domestic marketing. In domestic marketing, our focus is on the issues and the challenges and the basic concepts and definitions and the success factors which are important in the national borders. International marketing also, the issues are same, but here our strategic orientation is towards the resources in terms to satisfy the cross-cultural issues of the countries where we work in different environment and we have a strategic role to decide on. International marketing is more advanced and more little difficult. The basic concept involved in international marketing is seen in this diagram. We have the export marketing, we have the global marketing and we have the intercultural marketing. So these issues have to be genuinely focused in terms of the exchange of resources. Exports is when you are exporting goods to the other countries. Global market is the total world is one market. And intercultural and multicultural is when the exchange is between two or more countries. What is international business? Now, international business has a wide range of activities. It operates on more borders in terms of international marketing, where comprehensive approach is needed to satisfy the customers with different attitudes and different trends. The basic market is more complex and difficult because the activities of selling and producing and reaching to the customers are more extensive in terms to reach from the national to the international markets. It is sizing of the global opportunities so as to cash on the economies of scale and to cash on the markets which are more opportunistic and more growth oriented. Now, the basic markets which we cover in this kind of the subject are related to ethnocentric markets, which is generally related to the domestic market. Then we have the polycentric markets where we cover several countries, and the regocentric countries where we cover the regional countries. And then we have the geocentric markets where the world becomes a global village in a way of exchanging goods and services. Now, marketing is basically a kind of a social phenomenon. In this, we manage things such a way that we plan, we organize and we try to sell things in order to satisfy the customers. So, we are exchanging goods where value has to be created. The customer has to be satisfied, but the world is big. We have the multi-country marketing and we have the global country marketing. Let's see in this diagram, we have shown you where the arrows show you the different markets in terms of the multi-marketing concept. And here you have the global markets where the multi-markets are interconnected. So we have the diverse and more wide range of activities covered in terms of the global market. Now, when we talk about the international market, let's see the scope and the challenges of the markets in terms of operating our business operations beyond the domestic borders. This is the figure which beautifully displays the kind of the international marketing, the international management and the international finance. When all these three things interact, we have the international trade which exchanges goods and services. It emerges as a kind of a field of study which is more complex. The international trade involves the kind of the global marketing and the international marketing. Now, the growth of international marketing is guided by the many factors of the comparative advantages between the countries. Like some country can have the advantage of the resources in terms it is rich in some kind of natural resources and the other country has the scarcity of those resources. So, we can work on the exchange process so as to create value for the customer. Then we have the economic trends, the kind of the economic stability, the kind of the tax structures prevalent in the other countries, the kinds of the benefits of the low cost supply, like you have country like China giving you raw materials at very low cost because of the kind of the labor advantage and the kind of the basic advantage of the production factors. So, these are the economic forces and the trends which basically guide the international markets so as to decide on to work with international partners. We have the demographic trends, that is the changing cultural issues, the kind of the international standards and the universal standards people are adopting for their lifestyles, the political trends in terms of the alliances and the kinds of the trade agreements taking all over the world. Then we have the cultural and the social trends where the media impacts and the kind of the exchange of the issues takes place between the societies, where people want to use and want to look like and want to be groomed like other people. Then you have the technological trends which are basically changing in terms of the updations of the market. The new technology emerges in any markets, makes life easy for the other people also. The technological exchange can connect the world and can make the world a more comfortable place to live in. Now, the alternative methods of entering into a global market are many. We have shown you in this diagram that we have basic aspects. It basically depends on how much risk you want to take in life. We move from the moderate risk to high risk situations. When we want to take moderate risk, we have the indirect exporting. This is through the domestic markets to the international markets. Then we have the direct exporting, that is we have the in-house overseas offices which operate in the foreign markets. Then we have licensing, by which we take up the franchisee business and we organize those issues in our country or in other countries. Then we have the joint ventures where a ownership of partnership is done. Then we have the direct investment, that is the FDI, that is the foreign direct investment, where all the facilities in the foreign borders is owned. Now, this is a kind of a difficult situation and it requires lot of investment in terms to take up all the risk involved with the manufacturing to planning to the government to the control to the taxation to the technology. Everything basically depends on the foreign markets because here the investment is done by the foreigner. Now, the basic marketing process which starts in the international process is shown you here in this diagram. You have to understand the marketplace where the customer is the king, your customer is important. Then you have to design a customer driven marketing strategy. You have to construct a kind of a marketing program that delivers a kind of a superior and a better value in the foreign market. You have to build profitable relationships so as to create a kind of a customer satisfaction. Then you have to compute the values in terms so that the customers have profits and they have the kind of the increased standard of living. This is basically to create values where you have to build a kind of a relationship with the customers. So, the marketing process in terms of international marketing involves a market technology, the global market and the ethics and responsibilities of the social issues also. Now, the factors which decide the entry mode decision is shown over here. You have both the external factors impacting your business and you have the external factors also deciding the kind of the operations you take up in international markets. The international factors in terms of the international resources relate to the company's internal product factors, the company's resources and the kind of the commitment factors. Then the entry mode is also decided by the external forces related to the target country market forces, the target country environmental factors, the target country production factors and the kind of the home country production factors. So, these are the basic elements of the entry in the international market. The choice of the market is quite a difficult procedure because you have to compare the markets in terms of the cost and benefit advantage. Now, let us see the elements of the entry level strategies. First, when you choose a market, you have to decide on the product and the kind of the situation in which you have to operate. Then you have to set the objectives and goals related to that particular product. The choice of the entry mode basically depends on the design of the plan and then you have to focus on the target market. Now, when you try to enter into the market, you have the control systems also. The control systems relate to the monitoring operations and the kind of the revising entry strategy. So, this diagram basically gives you the all options to enter into the international marketing. Here we have shown you a scale, that is the entry mode continuum. In this scale, we are moving from exporting to FDI. Exporting is less risky and FDI is more risky. So, this is the kind of the contractual modes of expansion of business to the international markets, where we start from exports, go to the FDI. FDI is the foreign direct investment. Here all kind of commitment, risk, control, profit potential, everything increases in the scale. Now, the types of exporting which basically relate to the internationalization process are both the direct exports and the indirect exports. The indirect exports relate to the distribution, the export agents and the kind of the export mechanisms which we work on. The direct exporting involves the export department, the export sales representatives and the e-business technology. Then we have the cooperative exporting markets, where we have the export groups and the kind of the forums by which we can export. Now, here we have shown you the basic philosophies of internationalization in this basic model. We have domestic market, we have export market, we have multinational marketing and we have global marketing. Now, when we talk about domestic marketing, it is no international kind of commitment, moves to limited commitment, goes to substantial and goes to extensive commitment in terms of global market. The domestic focus is less in terms of domestic markets, and then it is ethnocentric, then is polycentric and then it becomes geocentric. All this focus is on the kinds of the markets where we try to segment the countries rather than the markets. So, the global markets are more difficult. Now, let us study the information which is required to phase out the kind of the stages of internationalization process. Again, we have a complex model which describes the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4. Now, phase 1 is the preliminary analysis. This is the kind of the basic ethics in terms of scanning the environment. The environmental scanning involves a kind of a total scanning process in terms of identifying the opportunities and the kinds of threats involved into the market. Then we come to the phase 2, that is the advantage of the marketing in terms of the products and the markets. So, we have market basically when it focuses on products, we talk about the marketing mix, which involves the kind of piece related to promotion, distribution, physical evidence, the price, the process and the product itself. Phase 3 basically involves a kind of a development or developing a plan. Now, this market development plan is important because here you do a kind of a situation analysis. After this, you do a kind of a strategic orientation in terms of making up the strategy, and then you have the budget, and the allocation of the resources has to be done in such a way that you form an action program. After this, the phase 4 is basically the kind of the implementation stage. It involves the basic crystallization of the objectives and goals for which you wanted to enter the international market, assign the responsibilities to the people and measure the performance in terms of achievement of goals. Now, the major international decisions required to enter into the market is to look into the global environment, then decide onto the international factors, decide onto which markets to enter, decide how to enter and then make a program and then make an organizational kind of a strategy to enter into international programs. Now, to go in global market or not to go in a global market depends on firm's strength and weaknesses. Why we have reasons to build up international markets or why we have to go global? Simple is when your domestic market is saturated. How to sell your products in domestic market? Try to discover some new markets in foreign countries where the products could be used. Or it is the foreign markets with high opportunities and high profits available, then why not use it? Then we have the stagnant or a kind of a shrinking market in the domestic kind of the country. So, in this you can cover or discover new markets in the international area where your products could match up with the needs of the products on the customers. We have the larger customer base in the foreign countries where your expansions can take place, and then you can reduce the dependency on the domestic market. You can come out of the competition in terms of the domestic market, and then you can follow the customers who are expanding in terms of their taste and change in the international markets. The whole channel of international market is quite difficult in terms of the operations. See, first you have a seller. We have shown you here in this model. This seller's headquarters are there in the international market also. Now you have channels which operate between the nations, then you have the channels which operate within the nations, and then you have the final buyer who is not in the domestic market but who is in the international market. Now the challenges of the international marketing are more difficult. We have both the driving force and the restraining force. The driving forces are the force which are positive and enhance the kind of the process of international marketing. This is the kind of the huge foreign kind of the in-depthness or the kind of the money required which you want to expand for the operation. You have the unstable governments operating into the international markets where things are really difficult because you have to work with the changing attitudes and the changing kind of the governments in the foreign countries. You have the foreign exchange problems where the currency exchange rates fluctuate every day. You have the foreign entry and the government bureaucracy making things very difficult. You have the tariffs and the non-tariffs barriers which put a lot of pressure on the cost ethics. You also have the corruption issues to be faced in the different countries. The e-commerce genuinely doesn't solve every issue. You have to interact physically with the people. The technological pirating, the entry of the substitute goods, the high cost of production, these are the difficult factors and the difficult forces which make the markets very complicated. The global marketing has become more complex in terms of difficult situations where the product extensions and the kind of the distribution has become more extensive. The expansion of the retailer base is beyond control, where every day new chains of marketing and promotion are coming up. The ultimate goals of the programs has to reach to the end user. The timings of the goals have to be synchronized in terms of the seasons changing into the market. But of course, we have positive forces which force people to work on international agendas. The driving forces are: first is the changing technology which is connecting people and the markets and making this world a global village to live in, where life is comfortable and beautiful because you can use many things at one station. You have the changed cultural values where people want to interact and want to buy other cultural needs because you are attracted to different issues related to the various cultures. Even the food which people are using in other cultures attracts you, and you can change the taste and the variety of your life. The market needs basically have become more extensive because the customer base is increasing. The kind of the education, the kind of the awareness and the changing demand forces the organizers and the people to enter into the global markets to add more taste and diversity to the products. The cost ethics is there, where the reduced cost of the goods in the kind of the domestic market and the international market forces the consumers to choose for the best option which is available at low cost. You have free market zones available where the kind of the trade barriers are less. You have the economic integration taking place all over the world, like the European Commission has emerged, where the 20 countries of Europe have come together to work on the common barrier, where a kind of a forum is created where they have eased out the passport and the visa regulations and also the currency regulations, where the euro dollar has become strong. So these are the kinds of the political favorable issues coming up, making people to force into the international business where life has become standardized. The kind of the peace which is existing in the world, where you have finished up with the World War II era, we have emerged in an era where we want to live and let live. So the kind of the peaceful relationships and the bilateral agreements between the countries have forced people to take up international markets. You have the strategic intent to build a base which is more secured and more expansive. You have the management vision of building up a strategy and action to go beyond the domestic market in terms to work with the global world. But the restraining forces in terms of the international marketing is that the culture becomes a very, very big issue, where it is very difficult to identify the needs of the people in terms of the local market and decide and supply the goods according to their local values. The marketed difference in terms of issues, attitudes, trends is changing everywhere. The cost puts a pressure because of the extensive and a bigger distribution channels. We have the national controls, but also beyond that we have the international controls. We have the philosophies of nationalism working in local markets, difficult to cross the patriotism feeling of the people and to promote our products. We have peace versus war stability. There are markets where still the markets are impacted by terrorism, by violence and other issues of life. The management myopia to think beyond the basic domestic market is difficult. The organizational history in terms has to be extended in terms to operate in markets which are difficult. the domestic focus genuinely puts a restraining impact, because you have to classify and categorize with the existing demands of the domestic markets, and after that only you can come up with the international market. So, the challenges with the international market is huge in terms of opportunities and in terms of the profits, because we are working at the world market which genuinely has a wide base of customer. It has customers which demand a kind of a more usable consumption pattern which is beyond the domestic kind of the aspect. Now, the principles of international marketing. We basically have a kind of a principles on which this process is based is the customer attraction, the customer satisfaction, and the kind of the customer retention. We have to work on this principle because retaining a customer is the basic function of management. The principle of competition, that is, you have to compete with the kind of the people who are in business, creates a long term value for the customer, try to build on the ultimate goal of the projects in terms to earn profits. Then it is the principle of the customer satisfaction and retention, which basically involves to create a customer which is satisfied and which is loyal and which is committed to the company. You have to improve the values related to the profits, and you have to relate in terms to create more value to the customers. Now, the principle of integration. This is, you have to integrate the needs and the wants of the people, so that what is consumed into the international market is basically a kind of extension which is used into the domestic market. The individual differences have to be crossed, and you have to position the product beyond the national markets. More on integration is the kind of the segmentation, the kind of the target market, and the positioning of the product required, so as to develop a customer which is new in terms of the identifications from the cultural values and to the other segments also. Principle of branding becomes very important in international market, because it is a kind of a umbrella which basically decides the price, the image, and the basic kind of trust and faith in the minds of the customers. The basic user can differentiate the product if the brand is strong. So, branding requires a kind of a large investment of money and a basic research on the perceptions and the values of the people, exactly what they like. The kind of the religion, the kind of the language, the kind of the other barriers genuinely have to be studied in order to create a brand which is generally more strong in terms to cross the language and the religion barriers. Then you have the principle of service. Products sold into the international market but do not have service stations definitely fail. So, we have to create the post sale services also. Like if you are selling a car, you definitely need a service station where the car could be cleaned or it could be updated. If you want to create a kind of a long term value with the customer, you genuinely need service stations which are more strong in terms of the staff which is equipped with the kind of the local issues and the kind of the language issues also. The product and services both are important in the global concept. Then you have the principle of the process. The process talks about to capture the value in terms to enhance the kind of the creating process with the strategic alliances with the governments, and to create partners who understand the local markets of the international markets. You have the brand, service, and the process put together to capture the international market. Then you have the principle of STP, that is the segmentation, targeting, and positioning. The process of segmentation is difficult, that is, you have to base the demographics in terms of the geographics, psychographics, and the behavioral values of the people. You have to make the opportunities to work into market. Then it is the principle of differentiation. The principle of differentiation basically talks about creating a value to product or making it different in the kind of the similar products. If the products is studied or the market is studied with the kind of the universal values, then it is difficult to sell. So, you have to differentiate the product in terms of the color, the variety, the kind of the functions, and the kind of the taste, and everything which it has to be unique in terms to sell into the international market. So, we have all these basic aspects which require basic principles in terms of selling, positioning, marketing, and creating relationships with the customers. Then the ultimate principle is the principle of balance. Balance is like you have to focus on the segmentation, targeting, but then you have to serve the heart and the voice of the customer. The emotions of the customers are more important. So, you have to synchronize with the values of the customers, where the environment has to be studied in terms to create issues which are more close to their heart. Now, the future of the international marketing is basically difficult in terms because you have to manage the kind of products which are more updated. The technology is changing. The customers of today are being educated, they are being groomed, and they are more aware. So, you have to develop the products of tomorrow. You have to look at the marketing myopia which thinks beyond the today's issue. We have to look into the future, which is more difficult. So, the kind of the global experience has to work into issues which counts for not only to the company's basic resources, but we have to count on the job markets and also onto the marketing aspects related to the product manufacturing in a different way. We have to work at the economies of scale. We also have to work on the assembly line issues. We also have to work on the cutting down cost procedures and then making the distribution channels less lengthy so as to reach the customer in an easy way. So, these are the basic issues and the principles which guide the total international process. But the basic marketing mix, which is a universal process impacting the national marketing and the international marketing, is the basic mix, that is the 4 P's. You have the product, price, promotion and place. We have shown you in this model. See, these are the basic key decision making factors. Product is important because you have to develop the tangible products and the intangible aspects related to the products in terms of the services and the kind of the assets and the kind of the trust, the faith and the value. Then you have the pricing. You have to develop the policies that bring revenue in the company, but they strategically give a low cost product to the customer. Then you have the promotion. You have to devise ways to enhance the desirability of the product into the minds of the customers. Then place is that the product has to be available into the international markets. Now, the basic advantages of this studying this product mix is that it reduces your cost aspects, it makes the product easy in the international market. It is a kind of a customization of product where the customers can basically understand and use the products. The global economy is talking about ideas, is talking about goods, services, skills, competencies all over the world. We have a kind of a reality market which is definitely impacted by the constant changes of growth, simultaneously also impacted by the retrenchment. We have the hiring of the employees, we have the firing of the employees. It is optimism, it is pessimism, it is risk, it is profits. So, there are so many positive and the negative forces operating into the international market which makes the international markets difficult. But in spite of all these things, the global economy is growing. It is offering lot of opportunities for the marketers to expand their base in the international market, where it is good for the life, the customers and the societies, because we work with better products and better services. Thank you, students.